This is the second video going up on the channel today about the anonymous SEC coaches and their quotes about Kentucky basketball for the upcoming season. Shout out to Jacob Polachek, KSR, who wrote this article, interviewed the coaches. He did a great job with this. It's an awesome look at how people who matter in the SEC are viewing this Kentucky roster. We talked about the big quote that went viral in the other video. It's national title or bust. But there's a second quote that I haven't really seen make its way around the internet yet from this article that to me was actually the more interesting takeaway or the more interesting dialogue about the state of Kentucky basketball. And I believe the way this was structured, I could be wrong, but I believe the way this was written, this was a different coach speaking here than the coach who spoke earlier in the article and said it's national title or bust that had a little bitterness, resentment on it. But this was a totally different approach. I'm just going to read the anonymous quote here again. Shout out to Polachek and the entire KSR team. Go read this article for the full reveal here. But quote, one SEC coach said this about Kentucky from last season into this season. They realized they weren't tough enough. That's my gut feeling. I felt like they swung the pendulum way the other way and prioritized toughness over everything in this cycle because that's what they were lacking last year. Jasper Johnson is ultra talented. Aberdeen coming up there, him fitting in. Lowe's a good player. How does that fit? Where does the ball end? There are going to be a lot of guys who are going to have fewer numbers than they did the year before. That'll be a challenge for them to deal with. But tougher guys into more skilled players is the challenge. Quote, he's not dumb. He's a good coach. I'm sure he's working on that. Will they simplify it? Will they make it a bit more smash mouth to play to players' strengths? That's the feeling I get. They better be tough. End quote. Two things being done here, Cart. I think praise coming toward this year's roster for both their depth and their toughness. A lot of dudes that'll get in the mud. But also some shots being thrown at Mark Pope's first team, a team that won a lot of big games last year, for not being tough enough. And then saying they intentionally went out and course corrected that from year one into year two. Do you think that there is substance to this line of thinking that last year they weren't tough enough and it was intentional in the ads they brought in this year to fix that?
I think so, given how maybe I personally view basketball toughness. Um, because I think some take it as like like the physical stuff, like the stuff you see about being tough, right? Um, to me, being tough is getting stops. And Kentucky was one of the worst teams in the country at getting stops for the most part of last year. And I do think some of that had to do with maybe a little bit of physical toughness that kind of was a part of that team. Like even a guy like Amari Williams, who I thought built like a Greek god, very strong. At times, he even was not very tough. Andrew Carr, not the toughest player. I do think there was a guys in the team that went through injury. Obviously, like Lamont Butler's shoulder was falling off the bone, yet he was still out there toughing it out. But I equate toughness to being able to get stops on the defensive end. And I do think that this year's team will be more equipped and better at getting stops than last year's team was. So inherently, yeah, they did fix the toughness issue, at least on papers.
If you associate toughness with defense primarily, I can understand the angle on this quote. I think I would have preferred it if it was laid out as they prioritize defense this summer instead of toughness. I think those are two different things. Um, here's what I would say. I get the angle we're going for here, and I think I buy that Mark Pope and staff wanted to get some guys this year that feel like they would upgrade weaknesses from last year. I think that's something every coach in the country does. I think that's why, using my program as an example, I think that's why Dusty May brought in Elliot Cadeau, is he felt the playmaking in the backcourt was awful. So let me go get the best playmaker I can get, even if there's issues elsewhere. To me, I can kind of buy like, we weren't the most physical team last year. So let me get a bunch of really physical guys and we'll figure out the rest later. I kind of think that's probably true. And I haven't really thought about that as, maybe why Mark Pope stumbled into Denzel Aberdeen and Mo Diabate and Jaden Quaintance and these guys that I would all consider highly physical players. Here's where you lose me a little bit. I think a lot of the individual players on last year's team were tough players or quote unquote dogs. Like, you really gonna look me in the eyes and tell me Lamont Butler's not tough? Like, I think he's tougher than the guards that Kentucky brought in this year. So unless this is just a shot at like Kobe Brea, who's in the NBA now, by the way, um, Jackson Robinson, Andrew Carr, like those guys aren't overly physical. But I don't feel like I ever really watched Kentucky last year and came away saying toughness is the problem here. I definitely have never felt that way about a Lamont Butler team. If anything, I would argue it was just injuries. How tough can a team be when they lose three guys to injury that were supposed to be in their top six? You know, like your depth is tested at that point. But I don't know. I don't love framing it as they weren't tough last year and now they are. I don't necessarily think that's true.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just kind of I don't know. Also, like I feel like toughness is a very overarching thought or whatever you want to say about it. Like I think there's different versions of it. Because to your point, part of being tough too is how you deal with adversity. And I thought that Kentucky did a great job of dealing with adversity. They could have crumbled given injuries last year. And even though they struggled, I think that they did enough to kind of, you know, they showed toughness in that regard. But the like I said, the first thought that came to my mind when that quote was put forward was defensively how this team competed.
Yeah. Also, like, I don't know. Like, the team to me, the centerpieces of it for most of the year when healthy was like Lamont Butler, Otega Owe, Amari Williams. Otega's tough, right? Like, to me, those are all dog type players, unless you want to take a shot at Amari and be like, he was a little spacey, and we feel
He
like we
was
fixed that at the five.
he was a little bit like inconsistent, like picky and choosy wise. Also, like toughness wise at the four, I think there would be an upgrade, whoever is put into that. You know, even with a guy like Denzel Aberdeen, who's probably gonna be starting at the two, probably an upgrade. They did probably downgrade in toughness at the point guard spot, but they upped it
Everywhere
in
else.
everywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, also like just call it what it is. You look at the marquee ads they made this summer. Most of these guys would be guys where toughness is something you say early on in the scouting report. Is that fair to say? Like Diabate is a tough player. Aberdeen's certainly a toughness guy. I think to an extent you think that's what Cam Williams will be at Kentucky. I don't know enough about Yelovich to say one way or the other. Again, I historically would not bring out toughness with Jalen Lowe. I would talk about his playmaking and his skill and his dynamic on ball creation more than like he's tough at the point guard spot. But I don't know. Part of this to me, it feels sort of like that's what they ended up with one way or another for various reasons. And now we're kind of trying to lump it all together and make a statement about last year's team. Like to be clear, I think Mark Pope thinks looking at last year's team, that roster could have won a national championship. I think he believes that. And I don't think he's crazy for believing it. So I don't think there was any like intentional approach coming into this offseason of like, we need to change things from what last year was. I think they needed to stay healthy more than anything else. And I don't know. Am I off base on that? Like, do you think it was intentional that Mark Pope approached this offseason and be like, we need to fix this? I don't think that
Well,
came.
that's that's the thing. Like toughness has very much lost its I think this is where you're coming from. Being good at basketball, upgrading basketball wise, maybe comes before talent. Is that
Yeah.
where you're at? Kind of, it's like you want your team to be tough. You don't want toughness to be like an it's covering up for the fact that you can't do something else.
Yeah. I think it's a feature of the guys they added that many of them are tough. I don't think that was the priority they went out to do. Like this coach who's framing it as like they realized they weren't tough enough and they wanted to fix that. I think last year's team was tough enough to win. How many big games did they win last year? They weren't tough enough to beat a bunch of top five teams in the country? Bullshit. They got hurt. That's all that happened. And they weren't at full strength and they still made a Sweet 16. So we'll see. We'll see if this collection of guys that are framed as tough is better or worse than what they had last year. In some ways, it will be better. I think they have a chance to be a really good defense this year, and that was never the case last year. But I also think there's a world that the offense takes a small step back. Shooting's a bigger question this year than it was last year, and everything's a give or take, right? If toughness is going to go through the roof on this year's team, you might not have an elite offense anymore. You might just have a good offense, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. Just like you said, toughness is great to have. It's just, yeah, be good at basketball.
Do you think last year's Kentucky team was good enough to win a national championship?
No,
Was it because of toughness?
it was part of it. Yeah, they couldn't get stops.
Really?
Couldn't get stops.
I think I got a total misread on this.
They couldn't get stops.
I just don't think that's toughness.
Mm.
I don't think they couldn't get stops because they weren't tough enough.
It's a part of it. It's a part. It's a small part
Yeah,
of it.
we're doing the thing. We're doing our semantics thing.
Yeah, they're fine though now.
They're fine now.
They're fine now.